Ladies and gentlemen, dear Maria, thank you for hosting this event. Member of the European Parliament. I'll make a few remarks. Thank you, Maria, first for your very inspiring introductory speech. As a European and as a French, I have to say we are in one of these defining moments where we finally realize that what unites us is stronger than what divides us. And yes, we're discussing the possibility that our British friends leave us. And yes, the French-German engine is not what it used to be. But still, from time to time, you get to remember, usually for dramatic reasons, why we have been doing all this and why it is still very much a project that matters. And the euro is very much part of this project. I don't know whether the founding fathers of the euro back in 1992 and 3, actually, with the Maastricht Treaty, I don't know if they had fully realized that they entered a new world, a world in which it's very difficult to cross the door in the other sense, much more than with any other policy, because sharing a currency is sharing the ultimate attribute of sovereignty. And once you have done this, there are a number of other things you do have to do if you want your monetary area, monetary union, as we call it, to be stable. We have painfully discovered that one of the things you have to do, for example, is to take care jointly of your banking system. And more generally, that you have to take care jointly of your financial system, at least to the extent, and I will come back on it, that it is intrinsically linked to your sovereigns. And that in the end of the day, as you said, Maya, the bottom line is you have to go to a fiscal union at some point, because in order to stabilize your currency, there is a number of policy choices that you need to do together. So I don't know, and actually I don't really think they fully realized what they were embarking into. Maybe if they had, they wouldn't have embarked into it, and that would have been a pity. Now we are where we are, and in order to stabilize our Eurozone, we have to do a number of things, and we have to do them, I agree with you fully, rather urgently. The crisis that hit us in 2007 and 2008 is not a European crisis. It's an American crisis. But this American crisis hit a very imperfect European structure, in particular in the Eurozone. An imperfect single market, that goes for all of us, but within the Eurozone, an imperfect, very imperfect monetary union. A monetary union in which the mutual dependency between banking systems and sovereign for each of the country was and still is extremely important. That's not a problem when the country goes well. So the mutual dependency between the German banking system and the German sovereign is absolutely not an issue because the country goes well. We have painfully discovered that this can be a very big problem when the country does not go well. Because even the best run and best performing banking system cannot be any more solid than the sovereign is. Remember Cyprus. Even the best system of guaranteed deposit is not more solid than the sovereign is. Because when it rests on the word of the sovereign that the depositors will be paid out, if the sovereign is broke, the depositors are not paid out. So we had to draw the consequences of this specific weakness of the Eurozone at the same time as we were drawing the consequences of the weaknesses of our financial system altogether. And this is why the last 5 years were so painful And for the part of the issue that I'm not directly responsible for, we are also to draw the consequences on the governance of the Eurozone, what we refer to here in Brussels, the six-pack and the two-pack. So in other words, we had to quickly fix the Eurozone so that it's not only a house that can be nice to live in when the weather is good, but also a house with a roof, which was badly missing before 2008, where it's nice to live in when the weather is bad as well. We're not yet there. We're in a far better place than we were in 2008, but we're not yet there. I'd like to focus on what is under my direct responsibility, which is not directly the governance of the Eurozone, which is the responsibility of Commissioner Moscovici, but the financial services aspect of it, which is under the responsibility of my Commissioner, Lord Hill. There are two aspects that I'd like to put in parallel to explain how they fit together and also how different they are. And these are two things with very similar names for very different contents: the banking union, the capital market union. What is it that is the banking union? Well, if you remember the summer 2011, in August, the rates and the yields of the peripheral countries and also the core countries, at least some of them, in particular France, were raising. The markets were testing the resistance of the Eurozone. Some of our banks, very solid banks, lost 70% of the stock market value. We were under attack, under massive attack by the markets. So in September 2011, I remember very well September 2011 because I spent each of the 4 weekends that were in that month in ECOFIN meetings. After which we decided that the banks in the Eurozone should be recapitalized 200 billion. That was point one. And shortly after, we started to work on two things. On the one hand, OMT LTRO for the central bank to take care of the short-term problems, and on the other hand, banking union to try to stabilize markets longer term. The first expressions of banking union concept were put together by President Barroso in a speech in the European Parliament in April 2012. At the time, we were preparing the so-called three-president report. Now there are 5, so there is a bit of inflation, which is good news for the Eurozone. But at the time, there were 3. And the three-presidents report designed a system based on 4 pillars: a single supervisor for the banks in the Eurozone, a single resolution authority, a single guarantee scheme for depositors, and a single fiscal backstop. The order is not completely inadvertent. The first one was relatively an easy go. The second one was more complicated. The third one, let's see. And the fourth one is definitely a hot nut to crack. But the truth is, we need all 4. And without all 4, there is no banking union that is able to sustain bad weather. So we are building the roof, but the roof is not built. And for as long as it's not built, we just have to hope that there will not be too heavy rain. The making of the banking union was going together, and it is part of what made it difficult, with a broader agenda that one for the banking union member states, so the Eurozone, as well as for all 28 member states, as well as actually for the entire world, and that is that we had to solidify our financial services. The G20 agenda, developed through meetings in London, Pittsburgh, don't remember all of them. I was attending all of them, but I don't remember all of them. We developed a global agenda for regulation. Why? Because financial markets were under-regulated, they were under-supervised, and most of the time, in particular in the banking sector, as history showed, they didn't have the right corporate structure. The risk mitigation internal systems were bad, and this is part of the reasons why we had all these problems. But of course, what we try to do is not to fix only what went bad, because that's the normal answer to a crisis. You fix what went bad, and the only thing that you can be sure of is that the thing that will go bad next time is not the same one. So what we've been trying to do, and this is why it was an enormous touch, is to have a holistic approach and try to put together at world level a framework for the whole of the financial services that would make sense. It's very difficult to say whether we managed it or not, so only time will tell. But the only good news in this is that we pretty much succeeded in having it global. The United States of America and the European Union together represent 80% of all world financial transactions. And they are by far the more advanced in the implementation of this global agenda. It's actually almost completed in the EU as well as in the US. We have our differences, which is normal, but the standards are broadly equivalent. So we're globally in a far better place than we were. This global agenda is mainly about risk reduction. Let me take the banking system, because we're talking about the banking union. The leverage of the biggest international banks before the crisis went up to 1 to 70. When I was studying finance a very long time ago, in the early 80s, leverages that you sort of sound leverages you would learn at school or at university was the range of 1 to 10, 1 to 15. When actually I tell my friends from university that are doing things completely different, like working in the retail industry, for example, that with the CRD4 we have brought the leverage ratio to 1 to 33, they tell me that I'm crazy. I said, how did you accept that it goes up to 1 to 33? I said, no, we brought it down to 1 to 33. So that gives you a good idea of where we're coming from. But of course, it was the worst possible moment in time to do this. Because when you tighten regulation, when you reduce leverage, you have a massive procyclical impact on banks. In other words, they lend less, at least for a time. Actually, at the time, you would like them to lend more. And we knew that, but we didn't have much of a choice. Of course, we would have loved that people before us, in the beginning of the 2000s, for example, when the internet bubble cracked, would have done the job, but they didn't. So we had to do it at that point in time and at no other. That was the situation, unfortunate situation we were in. So we knew it would reduce the ability of banks to lend, and it did, at least in the short term. In the longer term, of course, they're more solid, and you have a lot of costs that you avoid. I mean, we know the cost of having failing banks. We know it because we had collectively in Europe to use 13.8% of our GDP to guarantee or to directly subsidize failing banks. And if you want to know what is the immediate follower in public support in Europe, that's the steel crisis in the 80s, and the amount is 1% of GDP. And what it tells you is that financial services in general and banks in general, in particular, are so important for the economy that whatever the cost, you have to rescue it. In other words, you cannot afford to have it, and certainly cannot afford to have it again, because the type of cost we had to incur in 2008, 9, 10, if you look at the budgetary situation of most countries in Europe at the moment, they could probably not afford to incur it again. So you have to reduce risk, and you have to reduce risk at the worst possible moment, now, where you would like actually to release a little bit the pressure on the banks so that they can lend more, but you can't. So we have to live with this, and fortunately there is a cure. I'll come to that in a moment. So all this, the problems of the banks, the procyclical effect of regulation, the crisis in general and the lack of growth, led to a deleverage in the Eurozone between 2007, which was the peak, and 2013, which is the last known figure, of minus 40%. So that is enormous. That is all the more enormous when you will know that the Eurozone is dependent 70% of its financing from the banks. So that means the main engine that financed your economy was badly hurt. Now, another piece of information is that neither in Germany nor in France, which are by far the two biggest economies of the Eurozone, did any deleverage happen. So that means the whole of this 40% was deleveraging in the rest of the Eurozone. And it doesn't need to be an economic genius to understand then why a number of countries were in deep trouble. The banking union is about trying to fix that situation. It is about trying to cut the doom loop between the sovereign and the banks. In most of our member states, national banks own more than 80% of national debt. So, and they finance more than 70% of the economy. So, you don't need to be a great economist to understand that when the banking system goes bad, the sovereign goes bad and the economy goes bad. And the other way around. When the sovereign goes bad, because the sovereign is the last guarantor of the bank goes worse. And in turn, the sovereign goes worse. And this is the doom loop of the sovereign banking sector. And this is what happened to us in the Eurozone, in particular in the south of the Eurozone. The banking union is basically about saying, we are a monetary union. Banks are a key element of any economic area in general, but monetary union in particular. And therefore, we have to take care collectively of our banks if we want to stabilize our monetary union. This is as simple as that, and this is the fundamental of the banking union. Of course, that means risk sharing. So this is why we manage the supervision of all banks together. We have taken care of the legacy issues. So we have made an audit, if you wish, at the time the banks entered the new system. And if they were not fit and proper, member states had to recapitalize them, and then they could enter the new system. And now we take collective responsibility. If there are supervisory deficiencies, this is our collective responsibility. Secondly, we put in place a resolution system. Not only for the Eurozone, as all of these rules, for the whole of Europe. You have to understand the way the banking union interacts with the single market. What we are doing is we are putting the same rules all over Europe, in banking standards, in resolution, in deposit guarantee scheme, what have you. But because of the specificities of the interdependency between the banking system and the sovereign in a monetary union, we are managing these rules together within the Eurozone. This is what the banking union is. But the same rules apply in the UK, in Sweden, outside of the Eurozone. There's exactly the same rules, except that they don't have to mutualize the management of the rule because they don't share the single currency. So this is what we've been doing. We were pursuing, as I said, several objectives, mainly sever the doom loop between the bank and the sovereign, but also defragmenting the Eurozone and have a better transmission of monetary policy. It's too early to say whether the banking union was a success. It's not even completed. What I can say is that it was diluted vis-à-vis the original proposals of the Commission. It is a less tight banking union than what we had proposed originally. We had proposed a banking union encompassing all the banks in the Eurozone. That is not quite the case. We have a system with a decentralized approach for the smaller banks. It was delayed. We're putting in place progressively until 2024, and it's incomplete. We have just proposed the European Deposit Insurance Guarantee Scheme, and there is still no backstop. So the roof is in the making, but we build slow, and the storm may come quick. Now, I told you that what we have been doing to the banking sector has been instrumental in, or is contributing to impeding their capacity to lend money to the economy, to finance the economy. And that is true in the banking union, that is true everywhere in the EU. And this is basically the foundation of the Capital Market Union project that Lord Hill promotes very actively. One should not be mistaken by the names. President Juncker chose to call it Capital Market Union in his speech to the Parliament, so after this, there was no way you could call it something else. But the truth is, it has little to do with the banking union. As I told you, the banking union is having rules for all 28 and managing these rules collectively within the Eurozone. The Capital Market Union is completely different. The Capital Market Union starts from the diagnosis that in Europe, we are far too dependent from bank financing. In continental Europe, the UK and Ireland are a bit different. And this dependency has a cost, and this cost we paid in the last crisis. That doesn't mean to say we should decrease bank financing, but it means to say we should increase capital financing. And there are several reasons for that. The first one is that sizable additional financing will not come from banks because of all the rules we have put on them. And as I said, bad timing, but no choice. So it's like this, and it will be like this for a long time. These produced shortage of financing in some member states and not in others. There is no shortage of financing in Germany. There is no shortage of financing in France. But even in Germany and in France, actually even more surprisingly in Germany, there is an issue of adequation of the type of financing you need to the activity you want to finance. I explain myself. If you're a barber, if you're a butcher, if you're a baker, you will find a bank, probably a local bank, that will finance you adequately if your project is good. Now, if you have a young, bright researcher in the University of Munich, and you make a spin-off to create a biotech, you go to your local Sparkassen, and you say, I need 50 million capital. Not their job. They're very good at what they're doing. They assist you very well. They provide liquidity financing, liquidity lines, everything you want. But providing you with capital is not their job. However, they know you very well. They know your strong and weak points. But they don't know how to provide you with capital. Elsewhere in Europe, in the UK, in Ireland, a bit in Paris, you have people that know how to do that. But they don't get access to the information that in Munich, there is a startup that needs this type of financing. And even if they had access to this information, they wouldn't have access to a standardized information that would allow them to make the selection process and go to a sample of investment opportunities in which they're prepared to invest their own resources to really go deep and decide to finance or not. Because they start with 1,000 of companies, and finally, they dedicate real resources to 10 or 20. They need to have the information, the processes, the intermediation that allows them to do this. It doesn't exist in continental Europe. Not only in Germany, it doesn't exist anywhere in continental Europe. So in other words, what we do have is a market failure. We have more savings in Europe, we have more liquidities than we ever had. These liquidities invest short-term for basically no return. We have huge investment needs. Long-terms for most of them. A good part of them, because of where we are in the cycle, do not translate into actual demand. But those that translate into actual demand do not find the long-term investor to meet this demand. So we have tons of money, we have needs that can't meet. This is the problem we have. And this is the problem we have to fix. So it's a problem of quantity, we need more financing. It's a problem of quality. We need more capital financing because not all the needs of a company can be best met by a bank loan. This is what Capital Market Union is about. And this is why it is complementary to the banking union as far as the Eurozone member states are concerned. As my former boss, Mr. Barnier, used to say, it's necessary for everybody, but it's indispensable for the Eurozone. So do we need to build the Capital Market Union the same way we build the banking union? So rules for everybody, managed together? No. Why? For two reasons. One, the capital markets do not exist. So we need to build them first, which was not the case for the banking markets. Second, there is no interdependency between the capital markets and the sovereign. And the very reason why we had to do it for the banking union was this interdependency. We had to move it to a Eurozone-like sovereign backing or Eurozone banking system. And that was a precondition for the stability of the euro. So cover this Europe, cover this euro. We basically, as in many instances in defining moments in history, the answer is within our hands. If we forget why we did all of this, if we forget why we are together, if we forget that if we are disunited, we will probably not be so relevant on the world scene anymore, even the biggest of our member states. So if we continue on the withdrawal mood that I see in many member states, probably the future is gloomy, and we will have difficulties to move things at the pace that need to be moved to build the roof. If, on the other hand, we realize that, of course, with appropriate conditions, but we need to have a real discussion about not only, first of all, reconfirm that we want to travel to the same place, and secondly, how we want to travel there. And I guess that the second question is more difficult than the first one. But this is in a way the same question that we have to resolve with our British friends. Where do we want to go together? And how do we want to go there? And I'm one of those that think that the two issues are actually linked. The Eurozone needs to fundamentally revise its governance, simplify it, integrate further in many other aspects than the banks. And because it does need to do this, it is very legitimate that it redefines the way it relates to those in the European Union that chose not to share the same currency. So we have to have, be it in the context of the UK referendum or in other context, anyway we have to face these questions. And depending on how we will resolve them, I will be able to answer your question, but each of you will be as well. Thank you very much.